Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the party beach tent. It was quite hot here. Fortunately, the windows are open now. So I'll be telling you a little bit about Zotonic, the Erlang web framework. Imagine that you're an Erlang programmer and you need to build a website, right? Now you know this guy, and he's a nice chap and he's well dressed, so you decide to use that. And you start with some simple content. It can be a blog or some simple content types. Then you need some images, and you want to have them resized on the server to keep the responses small that you serve to the client. Of course, we want the website to be found as well, so we start doing SEO to optimize for the search engines, which does mean that you have to be on HTTPS as well, because we don't want to spend too much money. We'll do that with Let's Encrypt. Then imagine you start getting visitors from all over the world. You would need multiple language support, and you're getting more and more content. You need a way to manage it. So just write a CMS then, right? That's still not all. With all that content, you need your search on the site itself to be good as well. So you start doing Solar or Elasticsearch to get some TF-IDF and analysis and stop words and all the advanced stuff to give people the search results they're looking for. And well, let's assume you want some closed off section as well, where users can come and log in and do some more advanced stuff. You need access control for that. Maybe you want to email those users. Of course, the website should be interactive and work well and be fast, so you need WebSockets for two-way communication between the clients and the server. And if that site is still working well, you're still standing strong, and you're getting more and more traffic, then you may need to offload some files to S3, for instance, or some other file store. And in the end, maybe even introduce a reverse caching proxy like Varnish or Nginx. That's a lot to take in just to build a simple website, right? While it may have been initially hilariating, it's going downhill from there, and you just bail out. Many people do. And what do? Even if you're an Erlang programmer, you pick one of the existing solutions. I'm not naming names. They're not necessarily bad, except Django, perhaps. I mean, it's in the name of, obviously, the logo. And you'll find that even Erlang Central, for instance, is not running Erlang itself. We'll be doing something about that in the near future. So what I want to tell you about today is a third option, and that will be Zotonic, where you can combine using Erlang that you know and love, hopefully, with a good and fully packed CMS. First, though, a little disclaimer. I'm kind of an outsider to the Erlang community, a relative newcomer to the Erlang game, so it's quite an honor to speak at this Erlang user conference. And as you know, outsiders, it doesn't always go well. Some of them have the tendency to misunderstand and misrepresent and basically screw up things. So let me try to be the other kind of alien, the friendly one, that comes from a different community. That would be PHP and object-oriented programming in general, in my case. And, you know, the alien that brings some hopefully valuable insights from the outside world. That's the reason that I'll be going into the Erlang ecosystem as I experienced it a bit later on as well. That does mean this talk will be a bit less technical, probably. So you can count the number of code samples on one hand, and remember there's only 4 fingers there. So who am I? I'm David, I'm from Holland. I like wearing the t-shirt, obviously. I work at Dribit in Amsterdam. We're a web agency, and we're working with clients that want to make a difference, whether that be in sustainability or helping museums digitally publish their collections that have been closed off before, helping children to learn, other people, older people to remember their past. And we're all doing that most of that with Zotonic, which we adopted in July 2014 as the stack for us to build on. And with Zotonic came Erlang, of course. We now have about 50 sites in production running on Zotonic. And in the meantime, I joined the Zotonic core team as well as a maintainer. And let me just ask you, how many of you already know Zotonic or have seen it before? I see some people shaking their heads and some people raising their hands. And how many of you are using it? Not so many. That will be interesting to talk about afterwards, perhaps. Let me hopefully try to change that a bit. So Zotonic is both I already mentioned this, it's a content management system, like Django, like the other ones, and a web framework. It's all written in Erlang, obviously. It's free and open source. Comes with a web server built in, an email server. It tries to do a lot of stuff for you. So remember the list from before, starting with the simple blog and ending at scaling up and doing reverse caching proxies and all of that. Zotonic actually does all those things out of the box. And like I said, it's Erlang. So you get the asynchronous processing that comes naturally if you want to offload some tasks that are not needed to directly serve the HTTP response back to the client. Such as sending emails or doing some logging. That works really well with Erlang. You have the lightweight processes that are very stable and long-lived. And they play really well with modern web tech, actually, in particular WebSockets, where you need the long-lived connections. Fault tolerance is really useful, so people can start using Zotonic, developing stuff with it, start changing small bits, adding small bits, but not making the system as a whole unstable. It's just the small bits they touch that will not work if they're making some mistake, which can happen, of course. And what we do is try to offer pure Erlang solutions where possible. I already mentioned the email server. We do that so we can track bounces and do all the logging as well for email. We don't use any external cache for the hot data like Redis. We do that in Erlang itself as well, the in-memory cache, which is quite easily done with ads, obviously. And in the end, that all leads to less waste, which makes sense for clients that care about sustainability and people who care about that, to use the resources, the computing resources also that you have as efficiently as you possibly can. And there's some more things that Zotonic offers you. You get controllerless pages, so you may be used to frameworks like Cowboy, which are more low level. We actually rely on Cowboy for the HTTP layer, where you have to write controllers to serve pages and define routes or dispatch rules to get some web application working. To make that easy, we just have what we call the controllerless pages. So there's a naming convention in the templates that you use. We'll see some examples of that later on. That will then automatically be rendered depending on the kind of data, the kind of pages that you're showing to the client. Same for routing. You can define routing rules or dispatch rules manually, but you can also rely on Zotonic and do that in the admin interface to define at what URLs the content should be available. There's also some nice things. We use MQTT. I've heard the name before at the conference for messaging between the client, the JavaScript client, and the Erlang backend. It's an IoT protocol. It's very efficient and lightweight, but it works really well for this use case too. Well, and the email I already mentioned. Then there's more, of course. Okay, let me. And all this revolves around some principles, 3 basic principles that allow you to develop websites and web apps rapidly. The first is that we have powerful templates. So I already mentioned that you don't have to write controllers to do stuff, to do basic stuff at least. You can get there just by doing templates. You can do a whole lot from templates. Templates, as we say, they drive the data. In your templates, you decide what data you pull from the backend instead of pushing the data from the controllers to the templates. And what you want to do with it, how you will render it, how you will display it, all of that. Because the templates are so powerful, that means that you can do a whole lot without having to write any Erlang code. You can do a whole lot just by writing template syntax, which is quite similar to the Django template language. So that's a very common standard that many people are used to, which makes it easier for non-Erlang developers to go and try Zotonic and adopt it. Secondly, we do quite aggressive caching. I mean, Erlang is quite performant compared to PHP that I was used to by itself, but still, it's not the most efficient way probably to do to run your programs. But by aggressively caching in the dep cache, the ads tables, which is built on the ads tables, like I mentioned, that's not really a problem for us. As it turns out, a website usually has only a small portion of hot data that is really needed to serve most of the requests. And that only takes like 100 megabyte or maybe a couple times that, up to half a gigabyte, to make at least 80%, 90% of the website extremely fast. And finally, we try to include batteries. So there's a whole lot. It's quite a big application. I'll be going into that a bit more later on. So you can get started quickly. Let me just show you a quick example of the template syntax and what makes that so powerful. It's a very simple example, but still. So of course you can just display some properties that belong to a resource or a page, as we call it. And the default one in any template is the page you're currently looking at. That will be ID, so you can just display its title. But that's quite simple, obviously. But then you can also do more advanced stuff, like directly search through your data from your template. We do so through view models. That's the M search you see here. That actually calls some Erlang code. But you don't really have to care about the implementation details if you're in the template. You can just search for some items, articles in this case, that have some relation. It's the hasObject one. I'll be going a bit more later on into the data model that Zotonic's built on. Some items that have an outgoing edge, that have an object which is defined as the author relation to the ID, to the current page that we're looking at. So assume that ID title is the author's name, will be displaying in the list the articles that this particular person wrote. And same thing goes for more advanced stuff like access checks and ACLs, and also what we call live templates. So you can have dynamically changing bits in the web application without writing any JavaScript as well. So what this does then is render a template. Is that readable, by the way, in the back? Hope so. Yeah, good. Is render some template. I call that user status .tpl, and that template is here below, where we check if someone is logged in. Is there a user through the ACL model in this case, not the search one? Then we greet that user. else the current visitor is not logged in, we'll just have an anonymous greeting. Now the cool thing about this is that we can have that template subscribed to one of the MQTT topics. In this case, that will be, we have some conventions there, but that will be the page session. So the session of the user currently looking at the website. And then we can decide to re-render the template if anything changes about the session. If the user logs in, logs out, or other session-related changes, events. So instead of writing a lot of JavaScript to make parts of the page dynamic without having to reload everything on the server, obviously, you can take small pieces, small templates, and re-render only those when something specific changes. That the session in this case, but there's a whole array of topics that you can have your front-end template subscribe to. That can be resources as well. So the author example that we just saw, if somebody is changing the title, we can live reload that and re-render that, just that small piece in the front end. And there's more topics. You can also, of course, define your own custom topics and publish messages to that from Erlang. Right, I already mentioned this. So all of that makes it so that you can have small teams, teams that consist of just a couple of developers that don't all need to know how to do Erlang, and build quite some large systems with that, have a great impact. So I'll give just a couple of examples quickly. Some things we've been doing at Dribit and some things that happened outside of that. One is an award-winning digital monument where Dutch Jewish Second World War victims are being remembered. So there's a whole visualization here that actually runs on the plain Zotonic data model. There's also products being built on Zotonic. Channel Me is an example. It's a co-browsing software, very useful for help desks, for instance, that they can look at, see what the user that's experiencing some trouble is seeing at that moment. It's very secure, it's purely browser-based. So there's no need to take over remotely the complete system. Another example is an e-learning platform called LearningStone. It's quite extensive. It has all the it's a large number of users and closed-off sections, which would make reverse caching quite hard there, but still is very performant. And well, we're actually making some games on Zotonic as well. This is a platform for gamified e-learning to teach children about the natural sciences. Well, as you can see from these four examples, they're quite different, obviously, but they all rely on the single data model. And that's actually a very simple one, which makes it very generic and flexible as well. It is a graph or a graph-like structure. So you have resources or pages and relations or edges in between them. The edges always have a direction. They go from a subject to an object, and they're labeled as well by some predicate. So in this very simple example, you can see that there's some article. The article has an author, and Alice in this case, there's another person who has no relation to the article, Bob, and that same article has another labeled relation, outgoing edge to keywords that you see on the top. We actually don't use a native graph store for this. We just use Postgres because it's very performant and rather reliable as well. But we offer this abstraction on top of that to make it really, like I said, really flexible. And that's actually one of the core strengths of Zotonic, that you can build whatever you want and use the generic data model and get quite far without having to change the schema or do schema upgrades all the time, make database changes, stuff like that. And if you take that one step further, this particular data model, it actually allows you to do interconnected data as well, not within single websites as maybe isolated silos, but also between websites. You can create a network of them because the interchange, the interoperability of the data is rather easy. So it actually enables a certain data vision that well, it's about freeing your users' data, not containing it in a single application, a single publishing platform, but actually enabling them to share the data with other sources as well, which makes Zotonic very suitable for linked data. And this is the linked data cloud. It's gotten quite big over the last couple of years. So that's all kind of different data sources that are referring to terms and things in other data sources as well. So you get a network of knowledge. It's a bit similar to what Google is doing with their knowledge graph, obviously. I'm not sure if it's a coincidence, but it looks a bit like a brain to me. So, okay, all that is fine and dandy, but what about the developers, right? For a web framework to be successful in Erlang, it's not just the user experience that you should care about, but also the developer one. What I've been discussing so far is some ingredients, some features, and some meals that you can use those ingredients for to cook up. But now I'd like to take a look in the kitchen as well with you. How is Zotonic being made? How does the Zotonic community work? What decisions have we made? And especially what have we been changing to improve that developer experience? While we're only a very small team, we're trying to do some important things right. And then it turns out it actually helps to look at some frameworks in other languages, what makes them successful, and how we can use some ideas there in the Erlang ecosystem as well, to make Erlang web development more popular. I think there's 3 basic ideas. It's to be reliable as a CMS and web framework, friendly to get into as well, and it should be definitely easy to run and just to take for a spin. So what we've been doing is working a lot on documentation. We've revamped it completely, restructured it, and we've been adding an upgrading guide to make it easy to upgrade to the 1.0, which I will be telling you a bit more about in a second. If you want your users to take it for a spin, then it should be easy to start up and boot, right? If they should take it for a test drive and see where it takes them. So we have no dependency. You can just run a single Docker command and get Zotonic started on your local development machine. Start building some website with it and see what happens. And then if developers have the system running, it should be easy for them to both extend and override Zotonic's behavior. You don't want to be locked in to some system. You want to be able to do it, to make it work the way you like. So to give you just one example of that, there's what we call the notification system. What happens here is that we saw the search query like we had before. Now I added a custom search there called recommend instead of the query that we had before. That's just something I made up. I can put anything there that I like. Now to actually do something, to go and fetch some results and give them back to the template for rendering later on, I just have to write a little bit of Erlang. By adding to my site module, that's the main entry point for your website. Just a single function actually, which has a convention to be called observe underscore, and then some conventional names as well. So if you add that function and you listen to the recommend search, obviously, and then you can do something with that, call some model of yours to give back some results. If you compile this, Zotonic picks up the change, adds this observer to its notification system, and then when from the template a search is called, all the observers will be called by the notifier, and it can be a map or a foldel or folder, so it's very, very easy to understand for Erlang developers what's happening. And it just folder maps over all the observers in order of priority. So you can have some, your site will usually have the highest priority, of course, because it should be able to override anything. And there can be some modules in between, both Zotonic ones, built-in ones, and custom ones. They change the behavior as well. Of course, you can have your observer not do anything at all. That's perfectly fine. And by just returning undefined, the next one in order of priority will be asked to provide, in this case, some search results. A second example is for access checks. Know whether the current user is allowed to view or update or do anything. Again, you can just add the observer. Of course, this one is called differently. You listen to some view actions, then you get passed in the ID, the current page the user is looking at, and you can make some decisions. For instance, is this particular page a recommendation? Is it of the type recommendation? If it's not, we just return undefined, let the next observer handle it, and eventually fall back to Zotonic's built-in access check system. But if it is a recommendation, then you can call some custom ACL code, make some custom decisions, and then return true if the user is allowed to do it, false if not, or again undefined if you can't make up your mind. And of course, you need a fallback at the bottom as well for all the other kind of is allowed events that get passed to the observer. So I mentioned that the web framework should be reliable as well. One of the things that we worked on is by doing time-based releases. We had quite a messy release schedule before we started doing this. Sorry. And there were some releases when something was ready, and then there wasn't a release for half a year maybe, and again some release when someone felt like tagging something and publishing it. So what we started doing is every first Monday of the month publish a minor release, and we've been doing that for 16 releases now, and last Monday we had the 0.29 release. Still, if we want to make the developer experience a great one, then there's more to be done, obviously. We're now working very hard on the 1.0 to make it really stable and reliable for you to build your website with. There's a slight problem there in that Zotonic is quite old, maybe like good old Dutch cheese. It goes back to 2009. So we had to make some decisions there, and one of them was to look at what the 1.0 would be about strictly. And we decided it's not about adding features or not even about adding performance tweaks or documentation tests. It's all about backwards compatibility. So the 1.0 would be the one moment to break that, the compatibility, to make some large changes and then keep it stable, at least until version 2, obviously. That reduced the scope of what we were looking for quite a bit. So backwards compatibility, that's a fun time. You can start breaking stuff, which we did. We migrated from Mochi Web to Cowboy for the HTTP server component. We've been fixing quite some performance bottlenecks as well, such as memoizing the current language of the user. There was the great binarification, so as you can imagine, we had a lot of lists, a lot of strings, but for performance reasons we wanted to have them as binaries as well, particularly for the HTTP messages, which would stop them from being copied between the processes, but just being shared by reference in Erlang. And we added some components that were optimized again for performance, but introduced some BC breaks as well. Dispatch compiler for compiling the routes to a very optimized form, and template compiler, the same thing for the templates. We've gotten quite far, so now we can say that this summer we'll be publishing an alpha at least, and hopefully a beta and release candidate as well. Now, what do you do if you turn 1.0? It's time to wrap up some gifts, right? And that's actually kind of a hard part still. If you look back at some Erlang history quickly, then you see, like I mentioned, Zotonic was started in 2009, long before Hex existed, and that only came out of the Elixir community, obviously. And that's kind of a problem, because Zotonic has its own system for doing modules, and we even have our own module repository. That doesn't really make sense anymore to have now, of course, where there's hex.pm and there's OTP apps being published to that. So that's what we want to do. Like I said, quite some work. I hope to have it finished before the conference. That didn't happen, so I'm still working on that. It's quite a big code change, but nothing too hard technically either. And then you encounter all kinds of things. For instance, that Hex packages are not being published, are not being updated regularly. So even if the Erlang world has Hex now, the world isn't always sunshine and rainbows. And that made me just publish a very little project, called it Hexpub, to automate the releasing to Hex using Travis, actually. You just add some Hex username and password to your Travis configuration, and we tag something in your Git repository, push that over to GitHub. Travis will take care of the rest and publish that to Hex. Even better, of course, would be for GitHub and Travis, particularly to have native support for Erlang and Hex, but that doesn't exist, at least not of now. So in the meantime, you may find this useful. Then what you get in the end is this. What used to be a very large application, Zotonic, with its own module system, that you then plug in some of your sites, some modules into. That's kind of the traditional way to do software development, I guess. Have the core system as an application server, and then load your own things on top of that. Nowadays, you would do that differently. You would start with your site, the thing that you're actually trying to build, your site or web application or whatever. And that will align better with having small services in independent stacks as well. That site then has Zotonic Core as a dependency. Maybe some other Zotonic modules. We're splitting up the big monolith into separate packages. So for instance, the RSC or resource data model that we talked about a bit. Maybe you want to use the ACL, And then you have some non-Zotonic dependencies as well. That's perfectly fine. Now, Zotonic core itself will require the components I mentioned, like the template compiler, and the dispatch one, and the in-memory dep cache. But that will all be managed through Hex dependencies as well. So what this gives you is a lot of control over your own site. You just have Zotonic as an external dependency, but it gives your site the center stage. All right, time to wrap up. So Erlang is great for web development, and if you're building web-based content-heavy applications, just give Zotonic a spin. It does a lot and does it well, and does it out of the box as well for you. So you can be lazy, if you like. Also, we're keeping track, or at least we're trying to keep track as best as we can, of what's happening in Webland. So we're adding schema.org metadata, for instance, and also things like JSON feed. Not sure if you've heard of that, but that may be some kind of way to revive good old RSS, but do that in JSON instead of XML. And then when you need to start doing things, Zotonic gives you a jump start, so you can do the rapid development and build some cool things. Of course, being an open source project, we can use some help to make Zotonic even better, and also to draw some people into the Erlang web ecosystem from outside, if we can. People that may think now that Erlang is only about highly technical concurrency stuff. So we want to make Zotonic usable in Elixir apps as well. If you have some experience with mixing Erlang and Elixir and you want to help, please come and find me. Of course, the documentation can need further improvement, so that's very useful as well. And there's also things like translations. For instance, we have no Swedish one still. All right, thank you.
Okay, we have a moment for a couple of questions, if anyone has. Otherwise, I have one.
Good.
So for smaller customers, like, I don't know, little organizations or even free non-profits, for them it is important to build something and leave it there for years. And how upgrades are done? That's the most important for them. How do you upgrade the code and don't lose those megabytes or hundreds, thousands of pages?
Right. Well, actually, because we have the data model that I mentioned, that will be very stable. So we won't be doing any migrations to the user's data that you're talking about. So that shouldn't be a problem. Are you also thinking about upgrading Zotonic itself, and then?
Yeah, I'm imagining that like some 5-year-old Zotonic is running, and the time has come. It's too old. I want to upgrade, and I'm worried that I will lose everything, and that's a disaster, and that scares away.
Yeah. Well, I can just say that shouldn't happen. Of course, it will always help to have some database backups, I guess, before you start upgrading. To be fair, until we have the 1.0, there can be some backwards compatibility breaks. They won't involve like deleting your data, but some behavior is changing for sure. But when we have the 1.0, we want to follow semantic versioning correctly. So there shouldn't be any of those breaks anymore. And your data should be completely safe as well. So really no problem. And of course, if you're really scared, you can just leave it at the old version, right? But I wouldn't advise that.
All right. Any more comments, questions? Then
I guess it's lunchtime as well.
It's a lunchtime. Please thank our speaker.
Thank you. If you want some T-shirts, I have some of those as well. And enjoy your lunch. And